Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. This is Stuart Cohen. I want to thank you for joining us today on our enhanced customer security through the art of an assessment. We're going to get started in just a second while we're waiting for some people to log in. But once again, be thinking about your questions. This is all about how MSPs can grow, how they can be more efficient, how they can be more effective, and how they can either begin to use or enhance what they're doing with assessments to help provide more value add to their clients, as well as more SMB leaders are looking to MSPs to provide them IT and cyber hygiene, as well as enterprise risk management, kind of on the path to that. Different things you could do with assessments to help the organizations, as well as be better prepared yourself. So why don't we'll get right into it. If we can go to the next slide. As always with the conversations we've had, we want to make them interactive as possible. So please ask questions, please put them in the chat. Connect with us on LinkedIn. If you've got additional questions, post those questions. And, we're all about peer-to-peer collaboration. This is really about all boats rise with the tide, and how do we help all of the MSPs be safer, be stronger, be more efficient, be more effective. Also, let us know on topics you'd like to hear us talk about that would help the overall community of MSPs, as well as help SMB leaders that are looking for assistance and support. Separate and distinct, just to remind everybody, there will be a recording. It will go out afterwards. We'll post it on YouTube, so you'll be able to get a copy of it as well. Next slide. Separate and distinct from this specifically, we have two of our events coming up that are around what we refer to as public service announcements. One with Steve Mancini coming up in a couple of days around how CISA is delivering cyber hygiene services to assist SMBs. Steve was on about a year ago talking about some of the cyber and CISA essentials programs and how that's helping. They do a wonderful job. They help SMBs get started. And we've had a lot of people that have used their services and then come to us after the fact because they got started with the Essentials program. They knew they needed a little bit more. They came to us. We connected them with an MSP, and now the MSP is providing them local assistance and support. The next topic coming up in August is around Zero Trust. Zero Trust has gotten a lot of attention over the last 6 months or so. And the folks at the National Cybersecurity Center put together a white paper specifically around security trust. And then Ed Amorosa and ourselves, Ed Amorosa, the former global CISO at AT&T, helped us write a paper around continuous scanning and how continuous scanning is an important part of Zero Trust. And then we're about to publish a paper specifically with the MSP marketplace and MSP focused with the good folks at the JS group are doing that with us, and we will be getting that out shortly, so you'll have more information on that coming, specifically around how the MSPs can better be prepared and talk to and answer questions that might come from their clients around Zero Trust. So turn in on the 18th on that one, or submit your questions in advance. With that, I want to go to our speakers today. The three of us will be talking kind of more of a roundtable discussion versus anything else. Tim, as you all know, is with Gradient, the director of Kick-Ass MSP. Tim, maybe you want to talk a few words about kind of your perspective and how we can focus together on helping the whole MSP ecosystem grow.
Yeah, absolutely. So you guys can see the slide up there with my my beautiful noggin along with the one that's talking to you live. So my experience is a little bit unique. I started out as the client. From the client, I went to an MSP, and then while I was an MSP, I decided, hey, I should consult and rebuild a few of these. So I certainly did that, and then I jumped over to the channel to see about bringing this message to a much larger audience. And the reason why I'm doing that is because I've been blessed in my career and what I've done. And I just think that this life is a life of servitude. And if that's something I can do is help someone else with a little bit of my knowledge, or maybe just a, hey, you're doing it right, or just a conversation to listen to them, I'm certainly happy to do that. And that's what I'm doing here at Gradient as the director of Kick-Ass MSP. It's just helping MSPs get over those struggles. If you're sub $1 million, I'm here to help. If you're over 10 million, I'm here to help. I got experience in all those ranges. And in the end, it's how do we help others achieve their dreams?
Tim, thanks so much. Let's move on to Ryan. Ryan is the president of SecurityStudio, been involved with K through 12, knows everything there is about giving back and helping others and underserved markets. That's what he's been committed to for the years. And Ryan, I'll let you spend a moment just kind of giving a little bit of background and perspective.
Yeah, thank you, Stuart. And a lot of what Tim said resonates as well. My background is non-traditional. I came up the hard ranks as a security practitioner, hacker, pen tester, business intelligence, software dev, you name it. And along that journey, it became very clear to me that connecting with folks and helping them understand the non-technical drivers behind the technology. So, what the work is that MSPs do every day, right? Helping businesses conduct business that maybe isn't tech business, but filling those gaps was really rewarding. And then add to that serving of underserved markets and helping them understand, especially some of the smaller, K-12s and small businesses that maybe don't have a technical resource, helping build bridges between the MSP and the business, overcoming some of those communication hurdles. What I found was both organizations really benefited. The MSP was able to deliver better quality products and services that met the business need. The businesses were able to see and articulate that value more effectively to their shareholders and stakeholders. And the end result was lower risk and better security. And as a hardcore security guy, that's my greatest outcome in anything we do, is if we can lower the risk, improve the security, and leave people better off than we found them. And to reiterate Tim's point, it is an industry of service. We are serving folks, we're helping to protect folks. So something that is very near and dear to my heart, and I'm very excited to be here today with these two fine gentlemen and have this wonderful conversation, because it's really an important one.
Well, with that, let's just kick off the conversation, right? From an MSP that's primarily been doing IT support, that's looking to move into cybersecurity, cyber hygiene. Let's not even go all the way to part of the journey to get to enterprise risk management. Let's just say, how do you take and help your clients take the first few steps from IT support to cyber hygiene, and maybe the role that an assessment could play, the ease of using an assessment, and some things you might come out of the assessment with that might be opportunities for you to get started, to add value, and then kind of how you would help run your own business with things like that. Ryan, maybe I'll ask you to go first, and then Tim can comment.
So I always start with one of the oldest adages in the world is security. You can't protect what you can't see. And having done this for many a gray hair, whether it's a small business or whether it's a large enterprise, there's almost always some foundational stuff that's not quite complete, whether that's asset inventory, whether that's knowing what the network is. And so, assessments are the foundation for gaining that visibility, right? And they come in many different flavors, and we'll talk more about that a little bit later, I think, in the webinar here. But really, it's you already have that relationship with the customer in most cases, and this is an opportunity to deepen that relationship with them. And for those just getting started, it's some of the information you may already have. You might already know that network topology, but haven't necessarily formally created the documents that an assessment might be looking for. So I think when it comes to getting started, it's what are you doing for that customer today, and how hand in glove is that to a security or assessment requirement? And how can you leverage an assessment to not only help your client understand their gaps, but also highlight value your product or service is already adding to them that addresses a security concern, and use that as the conversation starter for now that we are going through this assessment and we have all these different things we could be focused on. Let's help you narrow that focus to the most effective thing that we can do, which may be a product or service you already provide to them. but haven't necessarily positioned as a security enabling product or service.
Tim, you want to elaborate a little bit on that and how you can take the first few steps and maybe some coaching you have on that?
Yeah, so I'm going to probably go way more rudimentary than that, right? Like I want to go to the point that you MSPs, and I've ran ones that are very small, a couple of people, ones with 25, 30 people, so on and so forth. But it's got to start earlier than that, right? You know, you always say, how do I know what I don't know, right? If we're talking about security, well, how do you find out what you don't know? Well, you start off with an assessment. I go even further into that. When you're first starting to talk to clients, right? Like, what are you driving to, right? Like, what are your drivers? What's your next step? Are you trying to sell the contract? Which I think is immensely incorrect. Personally, I think you're trying to sell whatever that next step is. If what you're trying to sell is I want a meeting, then that's what you're trying to sell, right? Eventually, in the process of going from selling that first meeting to I'm signing a contract, somewhere there you need to do an assessment. And there's a couple of reasons why. And one of the biggest reasons is just to be selfish, right? How you don't know what kind of a rat's nest you're going to step into without doing an assessment. Now, there's two different lines of thinking when it comes to assessment. It's one, there's paid assessments, and there's certainly a place for those, right? On the other hand, there's the free assessment. It's not super in depth most of the time you run the tool, but it just gives you some basic information. But with that assessment, you should also be doing someone, even if you're a fully remote organization, like one of my last ones was, we would hire people to go on site to do a physical review. And the reason why is I don't know how many bathrooms I've walked into, and that's where the networking closet is, right? That's not a good spot for it to be. So the whole point of an assessment is to know what you don't know. So like I said, there's certainly a place for paid assessments. Absolutely would never disagree with that. However, a free assessment as you start out into that client is critical to know what you're getting yourself into. I personally was able to mature my MSPs well enough that we just wouldn't take your business. Like, part of qualifying for our service was you have to be to current standards. We found those standards by doing the assessments. Hey, if your security closet's in your water closet, we got to move that out or we can't handle you, because every male or female or whichever way you want to go certainly has access to that room that's not secure. You wouldn't know that if you didn't do a physical on-site assessment. You wouldn't know you've got some old XP machines on the network if you didn't do that assessment. Then you can take it a step further, and you should be doing yearly assessments on your own clients that you currently have. Take it a step further, have somebody else, right, like a Ryan or somebody that can come in that has absolutely no connection to your MSP or your company and do that assessment of the services you're getting. The idea is to constantly be improving. You can't do that if you don't know where you're starting.
Any other thoughts?
Absolutely.
Ryan, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say absolutely, and you know that so many business decisions end up getting driven out of the results of assessments, right? What we're going to protect. I mean, I have yet in my entire career to conduct an assessment that we were able to address every finding, right? It's usually a mountain of findings, and then we have to refine that, and that's where the MSPs that serve the customers we work with add tremendous value, is in filtering through that mountain of findings, especially if you've never done anything. You know, I'll give you an example. Recently, we went into a small K-12. Now, you might not think a small K-12 has a lot. This particular K-12 had about 8,000 different endpoints, all being managed by one human who was also the principal, the superintendent, the basketball coach, etc. Well, those individuals, they need that trusted partner to navigate it, to help them make the decision about, okay, with the limited time and budget, what's that next most important thing? And without that assessment, we just go in circles. There's nothing to point to say, this is the why that I can take to my shareholder. This is the why that motivates me to sign that contract. So I think the assessment is a critical piece of building the why when we're trying to connect that back to the business value.
Well, and that even leads into the conversation we were having before we started broadcasting ourselves to the interweb, Ryan, was what you were talking about was assessments aren't just meant for technical, right? They're meant for you to get to know your client, right? We talked, like, I'm older, so I use older terms. I'm sure there's something new for it, right? I love gap analysis because it's, I went and voted today because it's the day to do that in the US. And what drives me nuts is when a no vote is a yes and a yes vote is a no. Like, can we just come up with a simplistic term and keep it? Gap analysis is a simplistic term. You're here, you want to go here, there's a gap in the middle. How do you breach that, right? You can't do that if you are unaware of what their business wants, needs, and forecast are going to be. So I can come in and secure, Ryan, I'm sure as much as you can. I can come in, secure your environment, put in new equipment, get it all up to date. The problem is, and I'm sure you can speak to this a little bit, is what happens when I do all that and I haven't considered 5 years of growth, which is what, old systems, we used to say servers should last for 5 years. Now they're virtual and they'll last forever. But what does your 5-year growth plan look like? And how do we build that into part of the assessment for that company?
Yeah, and I'd even go one step further with that and say, how, not just from a systems perspective, but from a business operations, compliancy, legal, this is an evolving landscape, right? We have new legislation that's been passed that the majority of folks are unaware of that will have a direct impact to how we do risk assessments and when and why and who conducts and all that stuff. It's, are you aligned to a continuous risk management approach? And Tim, the fancy marketing term they've told me that we use now is maturity roadmap. But it's the same thing. It's a gap analysis. It's how do I get from point A to point B? What are the series of steps, the amount of time and dollars and actions, activities that I have to do to move the needle? And understanding the needle for your business is critical. Because again, those assessments, they're going to contain information that's going to make people not feel the best. That's another pro tip for those as you are consulting your business. Make sure to highlight the assessment as a tool to take the next step and not necessarily a report of what's been done wrong. That's a huge issue that I see every day when it comes to assessments, is that if the results show a large gap, that there at times is a desire to downplay it, to hold it back, to look where to place blame, because it's interpreted as a what you've done wrong kind of report versus we did everything the best we could until this moment in time, and really this is just informing us on that next best step to take. So I think there's a little bit of that business acumen as well that is very helpful to accelerating through the assessment and getting to the real part of the work, which is what do we do with what we found? Now that we know what our gaps are, what's that next logical step that's going to help the business reduce risk or increase profitability, stability, support their growth and expansion plans?
No, I tell you, and that's a perfect statement to go into this, which is, what are you going to do with that information? As an MSP, as anybody that does a practice over and over, processes and procedures, right? That's kind of my life. What are your standards? If you're an MSP, you got to have some standards. You can't, I know the initial response for all MSPs, because I did it, was I'm going to take anybody and everybody, right? But you get yourself into some hairy situations when you don't understand the differences in manufacturing versus insurance. I had a client one time, and I won't say too much what they did, but they were regulated to the point that if they lost a single page of paper, and we're talking one-sided, it was a $10,000 fine. So, and we all know nobody wastes paper, so there's two sides. So every page in every manual was a $20,000 fine. So if you don't know that as an MSP going in to do your assessment, knowing what your base, like, these are my standards. You have to be on current OS. You have to be on supported hardware or software. I have to have 24-hour access or service for these specific pieces of this network, right? So doing the assessment is fantastic, but what standards are you applying it against to know how to go from there, because we want to get to security, but sometimes you just got to replace an old dirty cable.
And I love that, and you're absolutely right. And I would even add on to that as well. You know, as you're going through figuring out what you're going to do next and understanding that business, to Tim's point about, you know, what are your kind of minimum requirements, make sure you understand the vertical that business serves. While that business itself might not be a component of regulated industry, it's not a hospital per se, but it provides a critical service to that hospital. They could also be in scope for those requirements, and by extension, the MSP serving them could be in scope for requirements. So that pre-vetting and really understanding the markets that particular client serves, definitely stuff you want to know as soon as possible in engaging them, so that you can assess them the right way. You know the risks and liabilities you might be taking on as a business in engaging that market. Because Tim, just like you, I've seen it, right? Remember when all the CPAs said we too are cybersecurity experts, and then that didn't quite pan out the way everybody had hoped. I think I'm seeing a lot of that right now in the scramble to convert from maybe a traditional hardware-based or software licensing-based MSP to more of a managed service provider, where you're actually, you know, doing ongoing consultative or you know, daily management type stuff. That those are slightly different lines of business, and so you do need to be very aware that during that transition there are some new questions to ask. You know, it's not a one-to-one. Selling laptops, you know, yeah, there's a checkbox for compliance, but when we start getting into the risk side of things, there might be multiple checkboxes you yourself as an MSP have to also adhere to in order to meet the compliance requirement.
Well, let's expand on that a little bit, right? So you kind of rolled into insurance a little bit. You kind of rolled into don't touch this. What happens if I touch that? Let's talk about that, right? So cyber insurance it's gone from muddy to coffee, right? And I'm talking like Cuban coffee, right? There's not much more clarification there. There's just a little bit more clarification, a little bit more bite in there. What MSPs are not understanding today is that if one of the systems they're responsible for is at fault for any reason, and that company has to enact their cyber insurance policy, they're going to immediately say who's servicing your equipment or your environment, and then they're going to want your cyber insurance information, because they're going to work together, right? So when you're doing that assessment, when you're evaluating that company, you also need to understand what the risk is involved. You know, perfect example, talking about it earlier. It's if this client is a $10,000 a month client, right? That's 120 grand a year that client puts into your company. So at what level are you willing to take on that risk, right? Because if something does, God forbid, happen and they come back and let's say the assessment's $10,000, okay, well, for me, that's an easy no-brainer. I'm happy to help write that $10,000 check or part of that $10,000 check, because I'm keeping a big long-term client regardless of the road bump. Now, if that fine is $80,000, I kind of need to know what risk I'm at. The assessment should give you that risk, because these are questions you should be asking on the business side. When you're new into the IT world, or maybe you haven't quite matured to the point that you've matured your assessments, you're just going to go in and you're going to slap a piece of software on and run an assessment, and then you're going to take that report, and then you're going to figure out what your standards are, what needs to change, stuff like that. As you continue to mature in the assessment area, now all of a sudden you're talking about, I need to add in some questions. I need to spend a couple hours on site with somebody in charge, right? It can't be, I mean, if it's a CTO, a CIO, that's certainly great. If it's someone that's just managing the 20 servers and they don't have time to breathe, let alone, actually answer your questions, you need to have some people at the table that can actually tell you something. Part of those questions should be assessing the value of that company, because that's going to tell you what your potential risk is. And you can ask anything and everything in those sessions, right? You should be putting out, an agreement, a business agreement that you're not going to share their information, all these legal things up front so they can be open and honest, because without a true assessment, right, which is, let's find out what's on the network. Next one is, let's find out about your business through conversation. Next one is, are we going through a security assessment? Next one is, are they a banking institution that needs financial? Are they a medical institution that needs HIPAA, right? Are they PCI compliant? There's so many different avenues that you're only going to find those out through a questionnaire conversation with that company.
But maybe, maybe we should, if you go back to the remedial, and then we'll go more to the advanced. But if we just go back to the IT focused MSP that's trying to get in there, and you may ask, you may get trained in a sales and marketing session about, you should ask your clients where they are on their path to cyber hygiene. If they say, I don't really know what cyber hygiene is, that's what I look to you as the MSP for, right? Maybe we talk a little bit about how could you use a either basic set of questions, even ahead of a simple assessment, to try and educate, as well as, make them think a little bit about what are some of the things they ought to be aware of. And Ryan, you probably have seen this as people are just don't know where to start, don't know where to begin, aren't quite sure what it is, other than, they read all the time that, attacks are coming their way.
Yeah, and I always start off with the roles and responsibilities. The very first set of information that I like to gather from a business before I get into any other depth of conversation, roles and responsibilities. Because what I'm looking for is, to your point, Stuart, if they don't know what cyber hygiene is, okay, no problem. But how are you structured and who's ultimately responsible? Because a lot of times I find out that there's either a misunderstanding, it's the IT team, you go to IT, they say it's the business, and then there's that fundamental disconnect, or they don't know at all. And they go, I don't know, it's important, we need to do it, everybody's very concerned, we have no idea what to do next. So roles and responsibilities are critical. This also, as you get more experienced, you'll be able to tell dysfunction from function simply on that set of questions alone. So to Tim's point about knowing what you're getting into, well, if I go into an org and they don't have any clearly defined anyone for this responsibility, there's no legal team, there's no one to help drive this from a leadership level, I'll put a lot of the work into that, and let's get that structure in place first, and then we can start to do the assess, because otherwise it becomes so challenging to get the answers you need, to get the visibility you need. You got to have that leadership support, and from a business perspective, that's your first great opportunity to build stickiness with the client, to build trust with the client. So I always start with roles and responsibilities, and then I go from there, because that's an easy one, and it's not technical. Do you have a legal department? Yes, no. If so, what's the name of that human? Usually you can get through that in about 5 to 8 minutes, but it is very valuable information for everything that you're going to do after that.
Well, I think to your point is it also what it should do, right? If the MSPs that have their open ear going, right, because the other ear is lost in some conversation out in the office that technical person having, what that should be doing is they should be identifying, right, the approvers and the decision makers in the organization as well. Mm-hmm. So you're just doing an assessment, but during that assessment, you're finding out all the information you need to know, right? Like I was always taught about, approvers and decision makers and influencers and all this. And I always felt that, we identified incorrectly the decision maker. A lot of people will say the decision maker is the owner. I wholeheartedly disagree with that. I think the decision owner is the person that what's going on directly affects. If you're the IT manager, bring in MSP, bring in security, bring in software, that directly affects you. You're the one that's completely vetting all that out, right? Then what happens is that IT manager then goes to the owner and has a conversation with them. The owner's certainly going to want to talk to you. They're just doing their due diligence. but are you correctly identifying who the decision maker is versus who the approver versus who the influencer is? The conversation you were just talking about, Ryan, that identifying piece is going to tell you that. Because I guarantee you, the last thing on the owner's mind is I want to fire or hire a new IT company. The only reason why they know that is because their staff, I mean, they may have some personal pain, don't get me wrong, but it's their staff is talking to them, is telling them, here's the issues I'm having. That's when owners take action. It's when things are not running smoothly enough to allow them to do their job. Right? So I think that questionnaire that you're talking about leads to that. Who are the right people in the right spots that we can identify an assessment to make sure that we talk to who we need to talk to? Because eventually you're going to need to know who the CFO is because they got to pay the bill. Why not identify that up front?
And it could guide how you conduct the assessment and to what depths of detail. You know, you get into more complex organizations, you could be doing a PCI, a HIPAA, a CMMC, all within the same org, but across different divisions. So it's, for me, it's always helped keep things on track, and it's maximized the movement of getting through that process and to that next step when we've had clear defined roles that are aware of the requirement to support. And that's probably the other piece I would add is, as you get into the assessment, make sure you're also looking for who are your cheerleaders, who's going to support getting the work assignments assigned when they need to be, and not just, well, here comes the MSP asking for all this stuff that I don't have time to respond to, because unfortunately that reflects on you more than it does the business, right? If the business doesn't respond, well, that's because they're busy. If you didn't get your work done, then that might not be perceived as the business's issue. So making sure you have that right support, and to something Tim said very early on, know your risk, know what you're taking on, and how important is that particular system that you're about to take responsibility for to that business. If it's their crown jewel, the level of due care you might want to go through is probably much higher than if it's just a public, wiki page. So that stuff tends to affect, at least on our side of the world, and I think probably Tim and a lot of others as well, how we price it, what's in the contract language, how the nature of a relationship is going to function is directly related to how at risk we are for helping take on that particular thing. And to Tim's point earlier, just to reiterate this, having that minimum standard, because that might be too risky of a business proposition for your organization. You might say, you know what, you haven't patched since 1992. Everything is used off of eBay. Nobody knows where this stuff comes from, and it's mission critical to your org. Well, unfortunately, at this price point, that's not a mess I can clean up, because that's the other problem you'll run into is the $1 million. I want $1 million of work for a nickel of a cost. So assessments help you filter that. Doesn't mean you can't help them, but you might price it different.
Well, that's what's funny is you were saying that, and I was like, I just remember, so I had a client one time that client was a good client, paid his bill on time, was very conversational, but man, he was cheap, right? Like he loved the cheap stuff and he loved eBay. So one time it was like he needed a pretty hefty Cisco device, and we quoted him, with Cisco partner at the time, the whole 9 yards, and he's like, no, I know I can get this cheaper. So he bought one off of eBay, and literally the entire platform was Chinese. It cost him almost twice the amount to fix that thing that he bought, that had he just bought the actual thing he should have been buying. But to the point I wanted to talk about with assessments is, don't be afraid to ask for data, but know how to ask for data, right? Specifically if what you're going into is this area where you're going to be possibly uprooting another MSP, right? Which tends to be kind of, there's not a lot of brand new startups out there unless they're building a brand new building, but you got to know how to ask. If you come in guns a-blazing, I want all this information, I want full access, you're asking, I would say, very incorrectly. There's steps to doing this. So one, I would tell all of my clients, I will give you full access, but the moment I give you administrative rights outside of this organization, I no longer can take control of your organization, and I no longer have liability for anything because I'm not controlling the work, right? And that seems to be very abrasive, but it's also taking care of me. I'm being selfish and taking care of my own company. Now, with that being said, if anybody ever came to me and said, hey, we'd like read-only access to a firewall, can you get us that? Absolutely, I can get you that, right? It's asking, not only asking for the data, not being afraid to ask for it, but asking for it in a way that's non-threatening, right? And will get you a better result. The other thing that I would ask is if you're going with any compliance group, I guarantee you they go through some kind of assessment, some kind of exam, something. I had a couple of different groups that I was in that was heavy in exams and audits and constantly this and that, right? There are things they can't give out legally. But with that being said, there are parts of that stuff that they can give out. So it's not hard to walk in and say, hey, can I see the last assessment done by an outside entity, right? I would also say, if you're doing your job right, don't be afraid to have an outside entity check your work. Open your mind up. They're not coming in to show you what you're doing wrong. They're coming in to help you improve what you're doing, and they actually improve your business by doing that. I used to have this terrible, when I first got into the banking world, I had a terrible, terrible attitude towards auditors and examiners, right? It's like I just felt like something was negatively being done about my company, and I didn't like that. After a little bit of maturity, right, a little wisdom as we get older, what I realized soon was they were actually helping me improve my service to those clients. They were actually also giving me the foresight of what was coming down through regulations that I was able to go into these institutions when we would see auditors, examiners come in and say, hey, yeah, we implemented that 2 years ago because we seen you guys already asking for it. So don't be afraid to ask for data, ask for it correctly, and don't be afraid to ask for any kind of surveys, assessments, anything that they've done. Because I mean, in the end, it's on the client to give you whatever. I never ask for anything with pricing. I just think that's kind of a dirty dog method. Not that I'd never liked it, just saying. But what I would always ask for information that would help me know more about them.
It's fascinating. We were just on the phone with somebody the other day who, you talked about compliance agency that's working with an MSP of ours, and they were asking specifically around, PCI issues and credit card issues that one of the clients of the MSP, and they asked the MSP specifically, how many credit cards does the client hold? And the client, of course, said, well, we hold none. And the MSP said, we have no credit card information on anybody. And the compliance group then came in, did a, kind of a review and a scan of all the emails, all the data, all the systems. And lo and behold, they found 4,000 credit cards, in files, in emails, in voicemails, all over the place that, of course, the client said, we don't store any credit cards. So it's just a great example of kind of, what you think about your policies, what you think about your procedures, and then what you do in practicality and how you have to really think about that. And, with that example, I want to kind of go to the other extreme. We've talked about the base IT organization that's moving slowly or putting their toe in the water on cyber hygiene. Let's talk about somebody that's a little bit more of an experienced MSSP. They're providing cybersecurity services. Maybe they've done a lightweight assessment in the past, or they've done maybe a rich questionnaire that's short of a lightweight assessment. Let's talk about them and kind of the next phase of an assessment that they could do, maybe an industry vertical assessment they could do, or Tim, maybe to your point, they could bring somebody in to do a third-party assessment so they could then build a set of recommendations that MSSP could provide. So, maybe Ryan, talk a little bit more about, that side of it, and then Tim will go to you from the MSSP perspective. Or Tim,
so let me actually throw this at Ryan for him to think about while he's doing his answer. So I'm actually working with a group of some pretty wicked security people right now, and we're trying to truly like lock down what an MSSP is. So I think there's, to Stuart, to your point, I think there's a difference between I'm an MSP that's providing security services, whether I've invested in those people my own or I'm outsourcing, and what truly is an MSSP. I think we went from I'm crawling to, I'm sprinting. I'm trying to beat the fastest man in the world. But as you're thinking about that answer, Ryan, think about that. Think about what being an actual MSSP is like, because I'm telling you, the guys that I'm working with right now on the side, like everybody's racking their brain to try to get to that true definition of MSSP.
So absolutely, and I'm you and I are going to have some awesome offline conversations because I got a lot of thoughts around this. Simply put, inspect what you expect, right? So that's where it always starts. So you're an MSSP, you're doing security services. Most likely your client now has the assumption that you are security for their business. Hard stop. No exception, no gray area. I cut you a check with the assumption and the expectation that all things security are magically handled by you guys off somewhere else. Most MSS, managed security service providers, MSSPs, that are doing it right are the vCISOs, the network managers, the vulnerability management program. They are providing the full stack of security solutions and services that I would have internal to my organization if I had that hierarchy inside. It should look and feel like a one-to-one of an internal function that I would create, because as the business, that's how I'm viewing it. That's how I'm telling others that we're doing it. And for me, a true MSSP is skin in the game. They're taking ownership over that security up to and including prescribing, not suggesting, not hinting at or asking, or boy, it sure be great if you guys could patch. No, we take ownership over patch, and patches are applied on these days in these ways. And here's the change control process. And here's the part where the business has to say yes or no. And the rest of it is handled to these standards that are accepted by other high caliber security professionals. I think where it gets murky is when it's the, oh, and we do cyber stuff too. I think that's where it gets real murky, is if the and we'll help you manage your network, but we won't take ownership. And we'll do vuln scans, but we're not going to help mitigate or remediate. We provide vCISO, but we won't be part of your board meetings. That's where I think that I see the two camps emerging. So I see the purists, which are just hardcore security folks. And those MSSPs should be looking for every opportunity to maximize that stickiness, to deepen that relationship, to provide more capability, and using the assessment as a guide for where those gaps are that need to be filled. And the non-true MSSP, or those that are maybe dabbling, I think unless they're fully committed to going all the way to the purist side, are playing with fire, and might be better served by being a go-between with a true hardcore security MSP behind them, allowing them to deliver that capability, but not necessarily take on the direct liability. The biggest problem in this whole business is I'm going to help you up to this point, and then when it becomes a liability issue is where I back away. Well, that hasn't actually left the customer any better off because of your service. They still have that last mile, and the customers that I interact with, and previous to being, in this side of the world, it was always about, I gave that organization or that group money to solve the problem, not to nudge it almost to complete and then tell me I still am fully on the hook. No, I paid you to actually fix it. So I know it's a lot, and I probably squirreled off for a second, but really MSSPs for me are hardcore certified. I a lot of times won't let them talk to the business because they're that good at security that they need a buffer between them. And those that are dabbling, again, it's helpful. You're probably making revenue, but to Tim's opener, you might actually be creating some risk for yourselves by not having very cleanly defined rules of engagement.
So there's three things you hit on there that just fired for me right off the bat. So one, I use inspect what you expect all the time, right? So I'm not pitching our product, but when I talk about our product, when I talk about it, it's you're inspecting what you expect. Now, for me, it's directly related to money, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I love that phrase, but a couple things I'm talking about. So anytime I would go in and consult with an MSP, right, and we would talk about what's your responsibility, they would give me just this whole great setup, presentations. Here's what I'm responsible for. Here's what I'm not for. And I'm like, okay, but your client thinks you're responsible for everything. And they'd be like, no, they don't. And I'd be like, yeah, they do. No, they don't. Let's get them on the call. Let's have a conversation. Because they do. That's the basis of it. Now, here's the only method I've ever seen that will actually, you have that protection of here are the clear lines in the sand. How often do you actually review your actual contract with your clients? And I mean each and every one, not just it's time to renew your contract. How often are you reviewing your services? If your help desk is only open from noon to 5, I guarantee you those clients think it's open 24 hours a day, unless you have reviewed again, and overly reviewed with them the expectations of that service desk. Same thing with security. Hey, I handle you up to the point that it goes to Microsoft. At Microsoft, I can't handle it anymore, right? By the way, here's the documentation saying Microsoft doesn't back up your stuff, just so you know, right? So one, I've informed them. Two, I've opened up another lead source for some more revenue by providing some backups. The point being is, annually review with the owners of the company or your contact in writing, here's what we're responsible for and here's what we're not. That way they have a clear picture, and you can always refer to the yearly review. I'm not one that's so big of biannually. I think annually is just fine, but making sure that conversation is met and had as to what you are and are not responsible for. Because I guarantee you, they think you're responsible for everything, whether you do or not. That's how they are. The other one that you hit on was change control. So if you've ever been through a SOC audit, or you've ever reached your SOC, so I've spent years as SOC 2, type whatever, that's just a normal thing. Documentation and process. These are things as you're more mature, because we're talking about a mature MSP now, right?
Right.
Those things are documented. Change control is documented. I always had a specific board or queue or whatever you want to call it for change control. Why? If you're adding a permission and if you're removing a permission, that goes on the change control board, because it's way easier for me to go to that board and search XYZ company and give them a report on their last 6 months or a year of the changes they've made permission wise. And think of it, when I say a permission, I'm just not talking about access to a drive or you can see this. I'm talking about adding a user, removing a user. If you're adding or removing, that's when I talked earlier about let's keep it simplistic, right?
Mm-hmm.
A permission. If you are granting or removing, how are you tracking that? Right? A more mature MSP, as they're auditing themselves, as they audit their process, they're looking at things like that. And then the last one you talked about, and I can't remember the exact phrase you used, but it's like, what are you responsible for? What are you not responsible for? I'm only going to stop at a certain point because I'm only liable for that point.
Mm-hmm.
That was just, for me, that screams that co-managed space. And I love that co-managed space, right? Because it's just a great revenue opener. Because that's what we talk about, it's just having a conversation. I want to hit on this just for a hot second. So it's having a conversation with the other day. So we're seeing a lot of indicators in our economical market right now. So nobody's saying the word, right? But everybody's looking at that word like, we all know that word. Nobody likes that word, right? Because it all affects our pocketbook, right? The point being is, in their processes of creating assessments, reviewing what are they doing, right? How are they ensuring that that word is not going to affect them? They have to be mature. They have to do assessments to know what they're liable for, what they're not liable for. That co-managed space. I think the MSP space is going to blow up, and this is why. When you look at any company, regardless of size, they have people. They may have an IT department, maybe 5 people, maybe 100 people, right? Until you get in your larger, super corporate, high-level enterprise companies, they don't have talent from A to Z. They don't. As you go down into the SMB market and that medium market where we're at, those internal people have limits on their talent. They can't be fixing mice and doing security issues at the same time. Even if you have servers and help desk and IT this and that, the talent is limited. This is why I think the MSP market is going to blow up. Our talent pool is unlimited. You go to any mature or maturing MSP and they have people that can switch out batteries, and they have people that can design and implement extremely complex systems. That's the reason why. And as we're looking at the economical markers and what's coming down the line, that's going to press more, right? It's if I'm a business and I'm paying a person $65,000, $75,000 a year, but I'm getting this much efficiency out of that, or I can go to an MSP that's security minded, that's maturing, that's using assessments, that's looking for that next level of security, and their talent pool for the same amount of money or a little more, right? The market's getting ready to blow up. Assessments are going to lead to the knowledge that people have both on the technical side and the business side, and where the future of the company is going, to make those right decisions for these companies that are partnering with them.
Absolutely. I'll just add one tail thing, so I know we're going to bump into time here in a second. MSPs are, for all the reasons Tim said, absolutely, I could not agree more. It is going to be one of the fastest growing markets, and a big driver that a lot of folks aren't thinking about yet is talent acquisition, retention, and recruiting. So even if you can afford to pay for the best in the world, you hire my whole troop of awesome hacker friends to come in and do what we do, you're not gonna be able to retain us because you don't have enough fun work, because you're not working on bleeding edge stuff that we need to tickle that geekdom to keep us energized and motivated. And yes, we will knock that assessment out of the park, but I can promise you that after we're done doing the work for the day, we're geeking out on how we can use laser beams to take over Alexas or whatever that might be. And if you don't have that ability like an MSP would, to keep nourishing them and providing those opportunities for them to work on neat, interesting, cool, cutting edge stuff that feeds the beast, that lets them do the nuts and bolts more in a more satisfying way. Talent is going to become a growing concern beyond where it's already at. A lot of the senior folk are near retirement and or burnout. And as that happens, we're seeing it. And I know Stuart's seeing it, and Tim, you're probably seeing it too. They're leaving their positions as CISOs of this and that, and they're going to MSPs because they do still have value to add, but maybe they're done with the corporate hierarchy or the not getting that next cool project because the company's 10 years behind with legacy systems. So that's another great reason why MSPs are going to grow. And it's another great reason for businesses to want to leverage an MSP, because it's going to give you better access to high caliber talent at an accessible price point. We're trying to recruit and retain on your own. I mean, people are getting poached. The last one I heard was the gentleman was in the job for 4 days before an offer with double the zero showed up, and the first offer was already a shocker. So, competitive advantage. And then if you're doing really well and you can get some of that top tier talent, well, they'll just help grow your business even faster.
And there's something to be said, and I don't want to disregard internal IT people at all. They're a great asset, and a lot of them have some wicked tribal knowledge that allows them to fix issues really fast. The thing that I will add about people at MSPs, the people that I would add about that is they're extremely accelerated. We pull talent because we're constantly playing with all the best of the best, the newest, the craziest stuff. And that keeps them interested, right? Knowing how to manage those people is critical. The thing though is you take a brand new IT tech and throw them in an MSP or put them in an in-house environment and then compare those two or three years down the road, the acceleration level of knowledge and experience is 3 times fold in MSP, because they're jumping from company to company, level to level, different networks, different servers. What's the purpose of the whole 9 yards? They're just encompassing a ton more of day-to-day activity than internally. Once again, nothing against internal IT people, are critical to our environment. We're here to pump up the MSP, and I'm telling you now, the experience level is there, and that's the reason why I think part of the reason why we're going to blow up in the next few years is because they're going to be looking for a much deeper talent pool at a better cost per talent.
Yeah, without question, right? I mean, and they're going to be looking for it. They're also going to come under attack more often. There are going to be more compliance requirements coming their way. There's going to be, investors asking more questions. There's going to be board members asking more questions. There's going to be concerned employees. There's going to be concerned customers. We have, there's a law firm that's running Nodeware through one of our MSPs today that's been with that MSP for 5 years. They were running one of our competitors' products because they were providing them monthly scans for 4 years. And the client came to the law firm and said, if you're not running continuous scanning during normal business hours when you're all at work, so I know my data is always secure, I'm leaving you as a law firm because I'm worried about you having access to my data that the bad guys are going to get to because you're not paying attention. And there's more and more of that happening every day, that continuous monitoring and continuous management is just going to become the way of life for so many people. And there's a lot of different ways to do it, but that is going to happen over and over again, right?
So you hit two key things on there. We don't have time to talk about today, but we definitely discuss it much more in the future, right? You said the company was working for this MSP and this company was working together for 5 years, right? So great long-term MSP relationship. This company had a need. Now, in this particular instance, your product was able to fill that need, but that's the great point that I'm making, and we can talk about later, is you can still be a fantastic MSP, you still have great long-term clients, and partner with people with the right security solution, allowing you to do what you are so great at doing and not have to invest the time, money, and effort in bringing in people that's outside of your scope.
And the other part is, if you're a long-term MSP with a long-term relationship with a law firm like that, you ought to be doing assessments or asking the questions so you can tell them that you ought to be thinking about continuous scanning during normal business hours, not having the client say, if you don't provide this for me, MSP, I am leaving, right? It's the whole idea of assessments and question asking and the querying for understanding the business problems you face. So let's go to, I want to go to the next slide because we got 1 minute. I just want to make sure the contact information is up here. If anybody needs to get to Ryan, gets to Tim, we'll make sure if you come to, if you go to nodeware.com, we'll get you connected to them if we don't have the contact information. Once again, we're gonna continue to do sessions like this. I want to thank both. I want to thank Ryan for being our guest speaker and Tim as my partner on this, as we look at various ways we can help the MSPs, become more mature, grow their markets and be more effective and more efficient. So look for the next one of these sessions. Assessments is just one of the topics that we're going to talk about. But there's a lot of things that MSPs can do to be more effective and more efficient. And we'll look forward to connecting with you on the next session. And if you want to, go to LinkedIn, post any comments, collaborate. And if you need to get connected with Tim or Ryan, if you come to nodeware.com, we'll take care of it. If you have their direct relationships, that's great as well. feel free to reach out to them. This is really about helping everybody, and all boats rise with the tide. Guys, we're out of time, but thanks so much, and really appreciate your effort today and your time.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Brad.
Glad to be here. See you next time.